It was an ordinary afternoon in a quiet neighborhood, and the twin brothers, Jaden and Tyler, were out playing. They were excited about a new game they had come up with in the park. They took turns kicking a soccer ball between the trees, laughing as they tried to keep it from rolling too far away. The sun was shining brightly, and the cool breeze made the day feel perfect. Everything seemed peaceful as the twins enjoyed their time together. However, things took an unexpected turn when a police car slowly rolled up to the park. The officer inside, a man in his mid-30s, stepped out of the car and looked at the boys suspiciously. At first, the twins didn't think much of it, but when the officer started walking towards them, their fun came to a sudden halt. He approached them with a serious expression on his face and began speaking in a tone that made the boys feel uneasy. "Are you two causing trouble here?" the officer asked, his eyes scanning the area around them. Jaden, the more outspoken of the two, quickly shook his head. "No, sir. We're just playing soccer," he explained, pointing to the ball near their feet. The officer didn't seem convinced. He stepped closer, inspecting the boys' clothing and their surroundings as if they were doing something wrong. Tyler, who was quieter, looked up at his brother and then at the officer, unsure of what to do. The officer suddenly pointed at them and said, "I'm going to need to take you both in. You're not supposed to be hanging out here without supervision." The twins froze. They couldn't understand why the officer was treating them this way. There had been no trouble, no complaints, and they hadn't hurt anything or anyone. The park was their usual place to play, and they had always felt safe there. But now, with the officer standing in front of them, things felt very different. "I'm not doing anything wrong," Jaden protested, his voice shaky as he stepped back. He felt a knot form in his stomach, not because he was scared of the officer, but because he was confused. Why were they being treated like this? Tyler tugged at his brother's sleeve. "Maybe we should go home," he whispered, his voice low with worry. The thought of being taken away from the park felt strange and wrong. They had always felt safe and secure when they played here, but now everything felt uncertain. The officer, however, didn't listen to them. He reached for his radio and called for backup, telling the dispatcher that he needed assistance with two minors who were refusing to leave the park. Jaden and Tyler exchanged nervous glances, their hearts pounding faster now. The sound of sirens in the distance grew louder, and before they knew it, another officer arrived. The situation was starting to feel even more serious. More people started to gather around, noticing the commotion. Some whispered, others stared, but no one seemed to understand what was really happening. It felt like the world around them was shifting, and the twins felt small, isolated, and powerless. The boys, still in shock, were now sitting on the ground, hands nervously folded in their laps. It wasn't just that they didn't want trouble. They simply didn't know what was happening. Why was this happening to them? What had they done wrong? And in that moment, as the officer stood there watching them, an idea came to Jaden's mind. Maybe, just maybe, they could reach out for help. They knew someone who could make things right. But would it be enough to make everything stop? Would their dad, someone with so much power, be able to fix this? The twins' mother, Lisa, was running errands a few blocks away when her phone suddenly rang. She looked at the screen and saw an unfamiliar number. Thinking it might be about a package or appointment, she answered the call. But when the voice on the other end introduced themselves as a police officer, her heart skipped a beat. "Ma'am, this is Officer Daniels. I'm calling to inform you that your children are being detained at the park for causing a disturbance," the officer said in a flat, businesslike tone. Lisa's mind raced as she tried to make sense of what the officer was saying. "What? My children? What happened? Are they okay?" she asked, her voice shaking. "They're fine, but they are being held. We're just following procedure," the officer replied. "You'll need to come down here to sort things out." Lisa could hardly believe what she was hearing. Her first thought was that there had to be a mistake. Jaden and Tyler were well-behaved boys. They were just playing in the park, like they did every day. There was no way they could have caused any trouble. Her legs felt weak as she hung up the phone. She quickly started walking toward the park, her mind spinning with questions. What could have gone wrong? Why would anyone think her children were causing problems? She knew the park was a safe place for them, and she never imagined they could be in trouble there. As she walked, the worry began to settle into her chest. She had to get to them as quickly as possible. She picked up her pace, her heart pounding with each step. When she arrived at the park, she could already see a few people gathered around, watching from a distance. The officer's car was parked nearby, and there, in the middle of everything, were Jaden and Tyler sitting on the ground, their hands folded nervously in their laps. Lisa's stomach dropped as she saw her children like that. The sight of her sons, handcuffed and surrounded by officers, was enough to make her legs feel like jelly. She rushed over to them, calling their names as she approached. The twins' heads snapped up, and their faces lit up with relief when they saw their mother. They immediately stood up and ran toward her, but before they could get too close, Officer Daniels stepped in between them. "You can't take them yet," the officer said firmly. "They're being detained." Lisa's voice wavered as she spoke, trying to keep calm. "What is going on here? What have they done?" she demanded. The officer's response was cold and matter-of-fact. They were causing a disturbance, refusing to leave when asked. It's standard procedure. Lisa glanced at her children, who looked more confused than scared. She could see the fear in their eyes, but she also knew they had done nothing wrong. Her mind raced, trying to find a way to make sense of the situation. She knew she had to stay calm, but the injustice of it all made her blood boil. Why were they being treated like criminals? She took a deep breath, trying to think of what to do next. The officer wasn't going to listen to her pleas, but there was someone she knew who would have the power to make this right. Someone who could stop all of this with just a phone call. Lisa reached for her phone and dialed the one number she knew could help. She waited as the phone rang, the tension in her chest growing with every passing second. When the call finally connected, her voice cracked as she said, "It's me. I need your help. They've arrested Jaden and Tyler. They're at the park, and I don't know what to do." The voice on the other end of the line, calm yet filled with authority, responded immediately, "Don't worry, I'm on my way." As Jaden and Tyler sat on the ground, they couldn't believe what was happening. They had never imagined something like this could occur. In their minds, they were just two kids playing in the park like they always did. But now, everything felt wrong. The police officers were acting like they had done something terrible, and it made no sense. Jaden couldn't sit still. His eyes kept darting around, looking at the officer and then back at Tyler, who was staring down at his hands. The tension was building up, and the fear started to settle in their stomachs. What if they didn't get out of this? What if they were in real trouble? Tyler, usually quiet and reserved, was more worried than he let on. He didn't understand why the officer wouldn't just let them go. They hadn't done anything wrong. He glanced at his brother, wondering if Jaden had an idea of what they should do next. But Jaden was just as lost as he was. Neither of them knew what to do in a situation like this. Jaden, trying to calm his nerves, whispered to Tyler, "Maybe we can call Dad. He'll know what to do." Tyler's eyes widened a little. They both knew their dad was important, and he could help them, but could he fix this? The more Jaden thought about it, the more he felt like it was their only choice. "We should call him," Tyler said quietly, nodding in agreement. Without wasting any more time, Jaden stood up and walked over to a nearby bystander, a woman who had been watching the whole situation unfold. She seemed concerned but said nothing. With a shaky hand, Jaden asked her if he could borrow her phone to call their dad. The woman hesitated for a moment, but after seeing the worry in his eyes, she handed over her phone. Jaden dialed his dad's number and waited anxiously as it rang. It felt like an eternity before the phone picked up. "Hello," came the calm voice of their father, the U.S. Attorney General. "Dad," Jaden said, relief flooding his voice. "It's us, Jaden and Tyler. "We're at the park, and we've been detained by the police. They say we did something wrong, but we didn't. They won't let us go, and we don't know what to do." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. Jaden could almost hear his dad thinking, but then his voice came through, firm and reassuring. "Don't worry, Jaden. I'm coming. Stay right where you are, and I'll be there soon. Just stay calm, okay?" Jaden nodded, though he knew his dad couldn't see him. "Okay, Dad. We'll wait here." He handed the phone back to the woman and returned to Tyler. They both sat in silence for a moment, unsure of what was going to happen next. They could still see the officers talking in the background, but they seemed distracted now. For a moment, it felt like the world had stopped spinning. The twins just sat there, waiting for their dad to arrive. They tried to stay calm, but the unease in their stomachs remained. What would their dad do? Would the officers listen to him? Would everything go back to normal? These were the questions running through their minds as they sat, holding on to the hope that their father's arrival would end this nightmare. Though they didn't know it yet, their dad's arrival would change everything. The tension, fear, and confusion that had consumed the twins started to fade as the minutes passed. All they had to do was wait for their father's voice of authority to make everything right again. The sound of sirens grew louder in the distance, and Jaden and Tyler's hearts began to race again. They sat quietly on the ground, trying to calm their nerves, but their minds were racing with questions. When would their dad get there? What would happen when he did? The longer they waited, the more uncertain the situation felt. Finally, after what seemed like forever, the car they had been waiting for appeared. It wasn't just any car. It was their dad's black sit-in. Jaden's eyes widened, and Tyler's face lit up with a mixture of relief and hope. Their father had arrived, and with him came the feeling that things would soon be okay. The car pulled up, and their dad stepped out. He was dressed in a suit, his expression serious but calm. There was no hesitation in his step as he walked straight toward them. The officers who had been keeping an eye on the twins looked at him with some surprise, clearly recognizing who he was. The U.S. Attorney General didn't wait for anyone to speak. He walked right up to the officer who had been in charge of the situation. "Officer Daniels," their dad said in a voice that was both calm and firm. "What's going on here?" The officer hesitated for a moment, clearly thrown off by the sudden arrival of such an important figure. "Sir, these children were causing a disturbance," he began, though his voice lacked the same authority it had earlier. Their dad raised an eyebrow. "A disturbance?" he repeated, his voice even. "My children?" "Yes, sir," the officer replied. They were loitering and refusing to leave the area when asked. Jaden and Tyler could feel the heat rise in their cheeks as they looked up at their dad, who was standing tall and unbothered. They couldn't understand how the officers could get so confused about what had really happened. Their dad turned back to look at them. His eyes softened just slightly when he saw the confusion and fear on their faces. He knew exactly what this was, an unnecessary misunderstanding that had escalated far too much. Without turning back to the officers, he spoke again, this time with more authority. "Do you understand the situation now, officer?" he asked, his tone still calm but carrying the weight of his position. The officer didn't respond right away, looking down at his feet for a moment before nodding. Jaden and Tyler could sense their dad's power, even without him raising his voice. He didn't need to shout or argue to get results. His presence alone was enough to shift the energy in the park. The officers, who had previously acted with confidence, now seemed uncertain. "I'm taking my children home," their dad said, finally turning to Jaden and Tyler. "You're not under arrest. You're free to go. And I'll be filing a report on this." The officers exchanged glances but said nothing more. It was clear that nothing further could be done, and they had no choice but to let the family go. Jaden and Tyler stood up, their legs feeling wobbly from the ordeal, but slowly regaining confidence. They knew everything would be okay now. As they walked towards their dad's car, the officers stood by, no longer in control of the situation. The twins looked up at their dad, feeling a sense of security they hadn't had before. Their dad's calm authority had worked wonders, but they also knew it wasn't just his job that had helped them. It was his love and protection as a father. Once inside the car, their dad started the engine, and the familiar hum of the engine was comforting. The twins sat quietly in the back, exchanging glances with one another. They couldn't believe what had just happened, but at least they were safe now. They were with their dad, and they knew he would always take care of them. As the car drove away from the park, Jaden and Tyler sat quietly in the back seat, their minds still trying to process everything that had just happened. The sun had started to set, casting a golden light through the car windows, but neither of them felt the warmth. Their thoughts were too tangled with the events of the afternoon. The ride home was silent for a while, and it wasn't until their dad turned onto their street that the tension began to ease. He looked at them through the rearview mirror, his face softening as he saw the worry still in their eyes. He had handled everything at the park so calmly, but the twins could tell that his mind wasn't at ease yet. "Are you two all right?" their dad asked, his voice kind but firm, like always. He didn't need to ask to know the answer, but he wanted to hear it from them. Jaden shifted in his seat, still feeling the tightness in his chest. "I guess," he said quietly. "But why did it have to happen like that? We were just playing." He didn't want to say it, but the words came out anyway. "I don't get why the officer was so angry." Tyler nodded beside him, his face pale and his hands still clasped tightly together. "Yeah, it was so weird. We didn't do anything wrong." He paused, then added softly, "I was scared, Dad." Their father didn't answer right away, focusing on the road as he drove them home. He could hear the hurt in their voices, and it made him wish he could protect them from every unfair situation they'd face. But he knew that wasn't possible. What he could do, however, was make sure they understood their rights and always knew that they were never alone in facing injustice. "I know you're scared," he said after a moment, his voice gentle but steady. "You didn't do anything wrong. But sometimes people make mistakes, and that officer made a big one today." He glanced back at them briefly. "But I'm proud of you for staying calm. It's not easy to be in a situation like that." Jaden and Tyler exchanged a glance. They both knew that their dad was trying to make them feel better, but there was still a lump in Jaden's throat. Why had they been treated this way just because of the color of their skin? It wasn't the first time they had felt this unfairness, but today it had been different. Today they had been scared, truly scared, in a way they hadn't been before. "Dad," Jaden said after a while, his voice small, "what happens now? Will we have to keep dealing with stuff like this?" Their dad's face grew serious, but his voice remained calm. "We'll make sure it doesn't happen again. I'll be filing a report, and we'll take the necessary steps to make sure this is looked into. No one should treat you like that, and I won't let it go unnoticed." The car slowed as they pulled into the driveway. The twins still didn't feel completely at ease, but hearing their father's assurance helped calm their nerves. They knew he would fight for them, just like he always had. As the car stopped and their dad turned off the engine, he looked back at them one last time. "Remember," he said softly, "you're never alone. And I'll always make sure you're safe." Jaden and Tyler nodded, the weight of the day starting to lift from their shoulders. They knew that with their dad by their side, they could face anything that came their way. They didn't know what the future held, but they knew they weren't going to let fear control them. As they stepped out of the car and walked into their house, the warmth of home embraced them, and the feeling of safety returned. Though the afternoon had been hard, they now understood something important, that even in the face of fear and injustice, they had each other. And that was all they really needed. The next morning, Jaden and Tyler woke up feeling different. The events of the day before still hung in the air like a heavy cloud, but they were slowly starting to feel better. It helped that their dad had promised to do something about what had happened. Still, the fear and confusion hadn't completely disappeared. They had spent the night talking quietly, trying to make sense of the situation. But the more they thought about it, the more questions kept coming up. At breakfast, their dad sat with them, his face serious but his tone comforting. He had been busy making calls all morning, handling everything that needed to be done. The twins had tried to talk to him, but he had been so focused on making sure everything was handled properly. Now he was finally taking the time to sit down with them, looking them both in the eye. "I know you've both got a lot of questions," their dad said gently, taking a sip of his coffee. "And I'm going to do everything I can to make sure this never happens again." Jaden and Tyler nodded, though they still didn't fully understand what that meant. They had already seen their dad stand up for them once, but the fear they had felt the day before still lingered in their minds. What would happen if it happened again? What if the next time their dad wasn't around? "I want you both to understand something," their dad continued. "This is not about you doing something wrong. You didn't cause any trouble. The mistake was made by the officer, and it's important to know that even people who are supposed to protect us can make mistakes, and when they do, we have the power to make it right." Tyler looked up at his dad, his eyes wide. "But what if it happens again, Dad? What if no one believes us?" Their dad's face softened, and he put down his coffee cup. He looked at both of them with a steady gaze, as if trying to pass on some of his strength to them. "I believe you. Always. And I want you to know that you have the right to stand up for yourselves, no matter what. If you ever find yourselves in a situation like this again, you come to me. You don't have to handle it alone." Jaden felt a little bit of the fear lift from his chest as he heard his dad's words. He had always known his dad was strong and smart, but hearing him speak like this made him feel even safer. It was like he had a shield around him that he hadn't even known existed until now. "And it's not just about what happened yesterday," their dad added. "This is about making sure the world is a better place for both of you. I know that you may face challenges in life, but you also have the strength to face them. You have the right to speak up and be heard." The twins sat quietly for a moment, letting their dad's words sink in. It was hard to completely shake off the feeling of what had happened, but they were beginning to understand that they didn't have to carry that weight alone. Their dad had shown them the power of standing up for what was right, even when it was difficult. Jaden finally spoke, his voice a little stronger than before. "Thanks, Dad. I guess I just didn't know what to do yesterday." His dad smiled at him, reaching out and ruffling his hair. "It's okay, son. You did the best you could, and that's all anyone can ask for. Now we just keep moving forward." As the day went on, the twins started to feel like they were taking back control. The fear they had felt the day before was still there, but it wasn't as overwhelming. Their dad had taught them something important, that no matter what the world threw their way, they could face it together. They didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a while, they felt ready to face it. A few days after the incident at the park, the twins felt a mix of relief and lingering unease. The world had gone on as usual, but they hadn't forgotten what had happened. They kept thinking about it, even as their friends talked about their school projects and what they were going to do over the weekend. The twins tried their best to act like everything was okay, but it wasn't. Something had changed. News of the situation spread quickly, and soon the story was being talked about everywhere. Their dad's position made it a big deal, and people were paying attention. It wasn't just a story about two kids being wrongfully detained. It became something bigger, something that spoke to the experiences of so many people who had faced similar situations. The media was filled with reports, interviews, and comments, all questioning the way law enforcement handled the situation. At first, Jaden and Tyler didn't know how to feel about all the attention. They had never thought their lives would become part of a national conversation. They were just two kids trying to have a good time, but now they were being watched, talked about, and discussed. It felt strange, almost unreal, and the twins began to realize how deeply this event had affected them. One afternoon, while they were at the park again, this time with their dad by their side, making sure everything was okay, Jaden asked. "Dad, do you think people will stop talking about this soon?" Their dad looked down at them, a thoughtful expression on his face. "I don't think people will forget about it. Not right away, anyway. But that's not a bad thing," he said, his voice calm but serious. "This is important because it helps start a conversation, and conversations are the first step toward change." Tyler frowned. "But we didn't do anything wrong. Why do we have to be part of this conversation?" Their dad knelt down to their level, looking them both in the eyes. "Because sometimes the things that are hardest to talk about are the things that need to be addressed the most. Your story, what happened to you, can help people see what needs to change. It doesn't mean you were wrong. It means the world around us needs to get better." The twins still didn't fully understand, but they trusted their dad. He had a way of explaining things that made them feel like they could take on the world, even if it was a little scary sometimes. They didn't want to be the center of attention, but they also knew their dad was right. Maybe their experience could make a difference. Maybe their voices could be part of something bigger, even if it wasn't something they had asked for. That evening after dinner, their dad took them to the living room. He sat them down and told them that he had received several calls from other families who had faced similar situations. "Your story is important," he said again, "but it's also part of a bigger picture. There are others who feel the same way you do, and they're looking for people like you to help bring about change." Jaden and Tyler were quiet for a long time, thinking about their dad's words. It was a lot to take in. They were just kids, and they didn't know if they were ready for all the attention and responsibility. But they also understood something important. Their experience mattered, and it could be a turning point for others who were going through the same thing. As the days passed, the twins began to feel more confident. They were still nervous about the media and the attention, but they were slowly learning to stand tall in the face of it. With their dad's guidance, they understood that their story wasn't just about what happened to them. It was about making sure it didn't happen to anyone else. By the end of the week, they were talking about the situation less and less with each other, and more about what they could do next. They realized that maybe their story could help create a world where no one had to feel the way they had felt that afternoon. And although the fear didn't completely disappear, they knew one thing for sure. Together, with their dad, they could face whatever came next. As the weeks went by, Jaden and Tyler began to understand the full weight of what had happened. The attention from the media had slowed down a bit, but it hadn't disappeared. Their story had sparked many important conversations across the country, and people were starting to pay attention to the way children, especially children of color, were treated in public spaces. Their dad had kept his promise. He worked tirelessly to make sure that the incident was taken seriously. He filed a formal report, and there were meetings with local officials and community leaders to address what had happened and how to prevent it from happening again. It wasn't an easy process, but their dad made sure that Jaden and Tyler were always in the loop, explaining everything clearly and reassuring them that they were doing the right thing. One afternoon, as they sat in the living room, their dad shared some good news. "There's going to be a community meeting next week," he said, "and you two are invited to speak if you want to." Jaden and Tyler looked at each other, unsure of how they felt about it. They had never spoken in front of a crowd before, and the idea made them nervous. But their dad's voice was calm, and he encouraged them to think about how their voices could help others. "You don't have to do it if you're not ready," their dad said, sensing their hesitation. "But remember, you have an important story to share. You don't need to be afraid. You've already shown so much strength." The twins thought about it for a moment. They had been through so much already, and though they still felt nervous, they realized that their story could help make a difference. It wasn't about being perfect or saying the right thing. It was about standing up and showing that they mattered. "I think we can do it," Jaden said, looking over at Tyler, who gave him a small nod of agreement. "We want to help." The day of the community meeting arrived, and Jaden and Tyler walked into the room with their dad. The room was filled with people, some familiar faces from their neighborhood, and others who they had never met. They could feel the eyes on them as they stood up to speak, but their dad squeezed their shoulders in a way that made them feel stronger. When it was their turn, they both took a deep breath. Jaden was the first to speak. He looked out at the crowd, his heart racing, but he felt his dad's presence behind him, steadying him. "Hi, my name is Jaden, and this is my brother Tyler," he began. "We just want to tell you about what happened to us. We were at the park, just playing like any other kids, but the police came and said we were causing trouble. We didn't understand why. We didn't do anything wrong." Tyler stood beside him, his hands clasped together, but his voice strong. "We were scared. We didn't know why they were treating us like that. But our dad helped us. He told us that we had the right to be safe. We don't want anyone else to feel the way we did." As they spoke, the room grew quiet. The twins were nervous at first, but as they continued, they began to feel more confident. Their voices, though young, carried a weight that made the audience listen. They were sharing not just their story, but the truth about what many others had experienced. When they finished speaking, the room erupted into applause. It wasn't the loud, overwhelming kind of applause, but a soft, steady applause that made them feel proud. They had done it. They had shared their story, and in doing so, they had shown everyone in that room that their voices mattered. After the meeting, people came up to thank them. Some told them that they were brave. Others shared their own stories of similar experiences. The twins realized that their words had touched people in a way they hadn't expected. They had started a conversation, and now it was up to everyone to keep it going. As they walked home with their dad that evening, the weight that had once rested heavily on their shoulders felt lighter. They had faced something difficult, but they had come through it stronger, more confident, and more aware of the power of their voices. Their dad had always told them that they could make a difference, and now they truly believed it. They didn't know what the future would bring, but they knew that no matter what, they would stand together, and they would continue to speak out for what was right.